Thanks to GameMaker for sponsoring this video. I've been making games for 30 years now and I've used a lot of different tools to do that, but whether you're a pro designer or you're just getting started, sometimes you just want to get an idea crafted and playable as quickly as possible, and that's why I always keep coming back to GameMaker, both for my own projects and when it comes to teaching other people. I used to teach GameMaker to university students every year and found it really accessible, even for folks who'd never done any programming before. The software's really easy to use and you can start with a visual language and then transition to written scripting as and when you need to. Of course, it helps that the documentation is really thorough and that there are excellent support communities on Discord, Reddit and other social media. But a lot of the time, I've always found that the language is so intuitive and so close to plain English that I can work a lot of things out myself, not a void funk in sight. There's tons of learning content available on the platform which will take you all the way from beginner projects up to learning the sorts of skills that you might need for more professional level dev work. Then when you do level up to the point where you're thinking about commercially launching games, GameMaker has a one-time perpetual license, which is a breath of fresh air in an era when lots of creative software is trying to lock you into monthly subscriptions. So download GameMaker today using the link in the description and start building games today. Every time you design a game, you are always balancing these two different forces of familiarity and innovation. On one hand, if a game has no innovation, there will be no hook to pull people in and promise that they're going to get a unique, novel experience. But on the other hand, if there's too much innovation and there is no familiarity, there will be nothing there for players to latch onto in terms of things that they already understand. This is one of the reasons why genres in games tend to be based around things like how you control the camera, right? If we look at first-person shooter games, most games in the category will control the same way, like the WASD keys and the mouse or the way that the gamepad works. There's a big chunk of familiarity already there in terms of like how you control the character. That familiarity with the genre allows players to quickly play this new game and to actually get to the point where they can experience the novelty that's there, whatever it is. There are other points where familiarity is more to do with theming. Using tropes in terms of like your world building and stuff like that will make the game easier to understand, right? How the bad guys look. How do we know they're bad guys? How do we know which bad guys are going to spit fire at us? All of that kind of stuff is to do with familiarity, because game design is fundamentally a language and we are always in discussion with what players already know and what they've already experienced, and we have to kind of integrate what we're trying to do into that. On my stream this week I played a bunch of new games and 3 of them stood out in particular as games that are wrestling with this problem of how do I use what people know but also do something unique. And today I want to just take you through those examples and talk about how they did in relation to this problem of novelty versus familiarity. So the first game I'm going to talk about is Land Trains, which was sent to me by Baz, who is one of our Discord members. Hi Baz. This is a really interesting game. Basically what we've got is the game of Snake. You know, you've got the basic gameplay of Snake and then you have what is ostensibly a tower defense game. Is conceptually really cool. Love the idea of, you know, big B-movie monsters and a cool big train covered in guns that fights them. Amazing. The way that the game is currently structured doesn't really make the best of these two elements working together. We've got lots of zooming in to build, which feels a bit awkward, to be totally honest with you, because I can't now see which bit of the train is going to be firing from where. It's a thing that Baz has done so that we can see the cool tech up close, but I'm not sure it's going to contribute to the player being able to make decisions in the best way. The bit where I get to play Snake and my Snake is shooting at stuff, that's fun, right? The building stuff on the train could be fun, but at the moment it's not, because I don't really understand the decisions I'm making, because the train is stationary when I'm building and I can't see how putting a gun here is a better decision than putting a gun here, right? And that's kind of what you're looking for all the time, particularly if you're dealing with trying to design strategic decisions for players, trying to design situations where players are upgrading stuff or building something that has a kind of a functional difference depending on how you build it, then if the players can't see how what they're doing has any effect, then they're just randomly doing stuff, right? And that was the problem with the game, because the tower defense bit where you build is totally separate from the snake bit where you move around and shoot at the same time. The cannons all look a bit similar. There's a reason why in like a tower defense game you have like a blue ice tower and a red bomb tower or whatever. It's not just because that's the color it would be. It is about legibility as a interactive part of your game. So my advice to Baz there was to try and integrate them more. Perhaps to have the snake game constantly going, and then every so often you can pause and build stuff live with everything paused, and then unpause and it will move around and shoot with the new weapons, right? That kind of pause and play gameplay that you get in games like FTL, where it's a real-time combat, but then when you need to make decisions and stop and think, you can pause the game and do that. I think that would be a better direction for this.
Keep us steady, driver. Our fates know. The very world depends on it.
That's what she sounds like. I can tell. There's something appealing there about Snake combined with tower defense. I like that. I think there is a theme there that ties well to a snake-like tank driving around with all of these weapons on. It feels like an anime kind of premise, but to really go there in terms of the gameplay, I think it needs to not separate these two things out, and that's the problem with it's X plus Y kind of method of ideation. When you do this form of it's this plus this, the idea needs to fit together into kind of an interesting end product. Oh, it's The Last of Us crossed with The Walking Dead. Well, those are both zombie things, so I can't see how merging them makes a new thing. If you say, oh, it's like The Last of Us crossed with Animal Crossing, then that is such a big gulf between the two things that it's kind of amusing to think of, but it might be hard to actually use that to generate anything useful ideas-wise. The links between those things, how they are integrated, it's what makes or breaks it. So if you take Plants vs. Zombies as an example, right? Shooting zombies while building a garden, right? Because when you're playing it, you just see them as towers, but conceptually it is very weird. But it makes total sense and it all fits together in the game. Zombies are slow-moving, threatening agents that want to kill you, and plants, okay, they don't shoot in real life, but they do stay in place, right? So all of the gameplay is described in the title of Plants vs. Zombies, which is another one of these X plus Y put two weird things together. But the execution of the game design is not just about whether these two things go together, it's how you make them go together. And the problem with land trains at the moment is that the snake and the building do not integrate in a way that is like satisfying to play with. The second game I want to talk about is wrestling with the same problem, like how do you make this innovative mix of things and make it work? And I struggled with this game at first, but after a few rounds I could really see that it was working. And basically you are, for some reason, on a big dice in space, and there's a sort of math problem of you get given a random number from these cards, and then you have to score that number each round to survive.
If you win, I will leave your planet alone.
The number that you score is determined by which face of the dice you're on. So if you're on the 2 side and you need to score 4, you shoot 2 enemies on the 2 side and you get 4 in total and you're okay. But if you were on the 5 side and you shot 1 enemy, you would have overshot by 1 point and you would be out.
She's really distracting because she's like the only animated thing. I look over here, nothing is moving. I look over there, she's vibing and doing whatever she's doing. It's quite distracting from the game.
It took me a little while to get my head around, but after I'd played a few rounds, it started to become really compelling. So I do think that there is something here that I think is worth developing.
This is going to sound really obvious, right? But it's not obvious when you're making games. I played it and I was bad. And then I played it again and I was slightly better, and then I played it again and I was slightly better. Now that might sound like a really stupid, obvious thing to say, but if we do compare this to Baz's game, the train game that I played right at the start, when I played it the second time, I couldn't really see what I could do to improve. With this game, I can at least try and puzzle the game out and work out how to get better at it, right? And fundamentally, any skill-based game needs to have that quality to it. And again, I know that sounds really obvious, but it's something to watch for when you're getting your games play tested, because if people play it a couple of times and they don't get better, or they don't know how to get better, then that you've got a problem.
There's a similar struggle as there was with Land Trains of like integration between two parts. But in Land Trains, it was about the gameplay. It was about two sections of gameplay that weren't really made to come together in a cohesive way. Here, I think actually you've got an issue of like thematic cohesion. So you've got the dice and the cards that feel very arbitrary, you know, they look like they could have just been ripped from Tabletop Simulator. And then you've got all this sci-fi stuff, and there's very little effort gone into making these things kind of talk to each other in an interesting way.
The ammo issue is the biggest gameplay issue for me, and the timer just needs to be clearer, and then just keep playtesting it with different people, because I think there's something really interesting there.
But the biggest problem in this game for me is that the playing cards and the dice just do not thematically gel with whatever's going on with the sci-fi shooter stuff in this game. And I think addressing that problem is one of the easiest wins in terms of making this into a better game. The last game I want to talk about was one called TicTacTic, which someone in the stream very amusingly said should be called a peck builder, because it's about ducks fighting, which is very cute. Peck builder!
Biden, you need all credit for that if they decide to take that name off of you, because peck builder is such a good name.
Effectively, what's happening here is you are playing Noughts and Crosses, which threw me off initially, because Noughts and Crosses is a game that doesn't have a lot of crunch to it if you're an adult and you understand how it works, because you always win or block, right? It basically functions like a deck builder, where after each match you get to swap out some of these tiles and replace them with tiles that explode or tiles that spawn other tiles and stuff like this.
Right, so explodes when destroyed, and you've got some stuff that destroys my stuff, so I'm going to put that down here and see what happens. I don't quite understand the destruction and blocking mechanics yet, but that's fine.
After I understood what was happening, I thought this was a really compelling combination of things. And I've talked before on this channel about doing design as a way of fixing a problem with an existing thing. And in games, this could be you take a genre of game that you don't like, or that is too simple for you or whatever, and you try and address that problem, right? The funny thing about this example is we used to do this at the university where I used to work, as like one of the first things students would do was to basically hack the game of Noughts and Crosses or tic-tac-toe. Like, what would you change about it to make it more suitable for an adult audience, right? Make the grid bigger, add an element of randomness, whatever. And the exercise wasn't really there to make the game better, it was there to show people what quickly making changes to a game can do. So it's really funny to see this game, because it's doing that, right? It's kind of saying tic-tac-toe isn't really a game you would play as an adult most of the time, because adults kind of know how it works, and it just doesn't really scratch the itch, because there's not enough there to do. What can we add to make that work? This is really neat. It's got this kind of slay the spire combat thing where you rack up damage to each other. I guess that idea of like using a puzzle game to make a battler work goes back to things like Puzzle Quest or Super Puzzle Fighter, so that's not new. But it's a really good way to kind of make the tic-tac-toe and the upgrading of the pieces that you use for the tic-tac-toe make sense in this context, because you've got your funny little ducks battling, and yeah, it's just really good. It's a good thing. But I do think in order for this game to kind of be as successful as it can be, the developer really needs to look at the bits of it that are hardest to understand and just make sure that whatever helper mechanics or tutorial pop-ups or whatever are needed are there. When I was first playing this, I really struggled with understanding like what's in my bag, right? Because the thing about a deck builder is, you know, you've got a deck of cards, you loosely know how many are in it, and you can often look at what's been drawn and all of this stuff. There is a feature to do that here, but it kind of took me a little while to notice it, and I don't know if that's going to be a problem with other players. It's the sort of issue that you only really resolve by testing it with lots of people and like watching them and seeing what they get confused by.
do the sort of playtesting where you are looking over someone's shoulder. That's what I keep going on about. Put your game on a laptop, go to a convention. They'll usually you get free tickets to go to events if you exhibit. So it's a great way to go and see like cool stuff like cosplay and stuff without having to pay. It's like phone up a local con. Doesn't have to be a games con, can be a Comic Con, can be a board game convention. I've demoed games at things that were definitely not games things before, because it's just a good way to get free tickets. But that aside, this is the sort of game where it would benefit from a lot of the type of playtesting where you do not really get involved with the playtest and you just watch them figure it out and watch where they get stuck and then make notes on it.
Overall, I think this was a really neat game and like almost a perfect balance of novelty and familiarity. And I think what makes it so interesting is it has familiarity coming from multiple directions. The battler of the two characters that you control through the puzzle, that is familiar from various games. The idea of the deck builder is familiar. The kind of cute animals fighting is familiar, but you kind of put them all together in this unusual way, and
that's a really neat little game. I like that one.
As designers, we're always going to struggle with this tightrope walk of wanting to make sure the thing that you're making is original, not just for the sake of being original, but so that people have a reason to pick it over something else. It's just a fundamental part of design that dates back to basically everything else that humans have ever designed. Raymond Loewy is talked about as being like the father of industrial design. Designed lots of things, including the Shell Oil logo, the logo for the US Postal Service, and the Coca-Cola bottle. And he had this principle called M.A.Y.A, not a 3D modeling software because they didn't have that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It is an acronym which stands for Most Advanced Yet Acceptable. Really, this acronym is about targeting like that, what the goal of your design is, right? It's about trying to push your audience for your product right to the point where the thing is about as advanced as they can take it before they get their minds blown. At the time, a Coca-Cola bottle was like this. It was a wibbly bottle like this. If they'd put like two curves in it, everyone's heads would have just spontaneously exploded because they couldn't take it. That would have been too advanced and unacceptable. I think it's just an interesting bit of design history to think of here, because this is not a new problem to games. It's something that people have always been wrestling with, whether they were designing Coke bottles, games, or cars or chairs, of like trying to find this threshold of where something is interesting and novel enough to make people go, oh wow, without making them go, ugh, what's that? That's not a chair. I'm not sitting on that. Look at the state of it. Anyone who has ever designed a thing has taken this kind of challenge on of how do I make this thing M.A.Y.A? How do I make it the most advanced thing yet acceptable? And it's one of the things I love about running this channel is I get to see people struggle with this over and over again, and it's always like a really exciting, invigorating thing to see. A lot of what I do here is playing games that are sent me for review. What qualifies me to do that? I've been working as a game designer for 10 years. I've run game design courses. I've worked in a bunch of different areas of the games industry and just spent years and years sort of researching how games are made in different contexts, because I'm an academic as well as a designer. And what I try and do on this channel is give people a place where they can showcase their games, but we do it as a kind of game design class. So people send me their games and I critique them. I'm at a point now where the backlog of games I have in my email is quite unreasonable. I used to play everything I was sent and make a whole video about it. Now I'm looking at other ways to manage the backlog, which is why in this video you've seen 3 games kind of highlighting a general theme in design. So if you're a returning viewer, let me know how you feel about this format, because there are so many games, I can't get through them all, and I think maybe the best way to try and get through them all now is to do this kind of format where we stream some games and then kind of work out how to put them together into something educational after that point. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, keep innovating, but not too much, because otherwise people's heads will explode.